Vernon Coaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say in the start, I thought I rise to speak in support of the new clauses moved by my honourable friend and by my front bench colleagues. Can I say to the honourable member for Torbay, I thought they were very measured amendments because simply what they asked the government to do is to review the impact of the measures introduced in the finance bill where it impacts on poverty and inequality. And I don't know about other honourable members and right honourable members across the House, but let me describe what I think the vast majority of people in all of our constituencies believe, and what they believe this Parliament should be saying and what this Parliament should be doing. They believe that the current levels of inequality in our country are simply and utterly unacceptable. They believe that the levels of child poverty are simply and utterly unacceptable. They are not interested in somebody being able to tell them there are 2 million children living in terrible poverty, or whether there are 1,850,000 people children living in absolute poverty or indeed relative poverty. What they are sick of, and what I'm sick of, and what this Parliament should be reflecting, is the fact that across this country people are saying, can't you do any better? Can't you do something about the fact that there are still pensioners in one of the richest countries in the world that cannot heat themselves properly at Christmas or in cold weather? What are you, as a Parliament, doing about it? When we see children living in absolute poverty who cannot afford to go to school with shoes, with clothes, being given food as a charity by people in those schools, they're not interested in whether it's gone up by 0.5% or down by 1%. What they're interested in is what this Parliament is doing about it and what we're saying. And those clauses, the new clauses, all they do is to say to the government, if you believe that, for example, Section 5, through allowing people to keep more of their income when they're in work, addresses some of those issues, let's have a review of it to see whether that is the case or not. And I just think that's what people would expect. I'm sick of it myself, Madam Deputy Speaker. When I drive around, not just in my own constituency, but drive around the country, and you see enormous wealth. I'm not talking about people who've necessarily worked hard and done well. We all want to see that. But massive accumulated wealth, not just income, with people able to afford astronomical sums on different ways of life. And then you drive half a mile down the street and there's a kid in a house where they can't afford to put anything proper on the table.
Would my friend give way?
Of course.
Would my friend agree with me that it is terrible to think of all the many places in the country where there are so many more food banks, and this increase which the Trussell Trust has told us about, year-on-year increase, is deeply worrying?
I think that's right. Let me say this to my honourable friend as well. Every member of this House would no doubt say, isn't it great that food banks and all the volunteers that there are at food banks? And I agree with that. I agree with the fact that that we see across communities, across this country, whatever part of the UK it is, who volunteer their time and people give to them and we get people at food banks. What I object to, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that food banks, which are there as a charity, are used as public policy. That they're used as a way of tackling. What on earth has it come to, just half a minute, 2019, 2018, where food banks are a public policy mechanism for dealing with poverty? They're supposed to be charitable things to do with people who somehow slip through the net, not someone that the DWP sends them down there with tokens to go to. It's an absolute outrage. This Parliament should be seething about it. And it's not to decry the volunteers. It brings the very best out of people. But goodness me, is that public policy now? Is that public policy? And this is what the minister should be addressing. This is what the challenge to the government that every member of this House, I think, would say to them, what is it that's going to address these issues? Not some academic debate about a bit of research here or a bit of research there, which means somebody, the member for Torbay, can go, oh, there's 1,000 less here, 2% less there. It is a fundamental disgrace in our country, the levels of poverty and inequality. And why isn't the government raging about it through its budget to do something about it?
I thank the honourable member. And just on the point that you were making regarding food banks and the volunteers who work there, do you agree with me that when the honourable member, sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, speaks to the volunteers, they say they don't want to be doing this work? It shouldn't be necessary because people should be able to pay for their food for their families without having to rely on handouts. They don't want to be volunteering for this because it shouldn't exist in 2019.
I quite agree with my honourable friend and the points that she's just made. So I, in a relatively brief contribution, just wanted to say this to the government. Why is it a point of difference to actually say that a perfectly reasonable amendment or new clauses which say, why doesn't the government review the impacts on poverty and inequality? When the minister responds, can he get up and say that none of the budgetary measures through the finance bill which are to be implemented, the minister refuses to keep under review looking at whether they impact on poverty and inequality or not? Is that what he's honestly saying? If he's not saying that, why can't he accept an amendment which asks him to review that? Who disagrees with looking at whether the policies that our government is pursuing actually tackle poverty and inequality? I find that absolutely incredulous about it. And the minister can sort of say, oh, well, that's, rhetorical nonsense. But we'll see when he responds about how he's going to review, how the minister is going to review what the impact of the government's policies are. He will know, and I will give way to my honourable friend, he will know, for example, that one of the key challenges for government policy is why is it that despite what the government has tried to do, the numbers of people in poverty who are working is increasing. Now that's a policy challenge. It's not a Labour Tory thing, that is a policy challenge. But if all the minister does is retrench his back, he is not acting as a minister of the Crown, he is not acting as a government minister responsible for our country, he's acting as a Tory party politician. And that's not what a minister of the Crown should be doing.
I'm very grateful to my own friend for giving way. Does he agree with me, and I find it sad to say this, that perhaps the reason that these amendments are not being agreed to is that they would give the evidence that these policies are wrong and are harming our citizens?
Well, I agree. That, you see, that's the point. If the minister is listening, that's the point that the point that would be. And surely a government, what the government would want to know is that if its policies are working, then it would do more of it. And if its policies aren't working, then all of us would want the government to change tack. So I just say in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, poverty and inequality should be at the heart of everything the government does, should be at the heart of everything this Parliament demands. And all those amendments are doing is to say to the government, look at what your policies are doing, look at the impact out there, and what are they doing to tackle the inequality we see in our country, which is utterly unacceptable, the child poverty, which is utterly unacceptable, the increased use of food banks, which is utterly unacceptable, and how are the government's policies going to address that? And that's the purpose of the amendments, which I totally support.
Helen Whately. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Gedling. And in fact, I can agree with him on some of the sentiments he's expressed. I think the level of poverty is still something that's unacceptable and makes me unhappy. I'm unhappy about the level of inequality too across the country and within my own constituency.